what do you do when you actually can follow your dreams? It's like, what happens if you're not struggling? We work with a lot of clients on guilt around money. Like, is it okay for me to be okay with money, but my sister to struggle, or my friend, or whatever? It's all of these things. The way we say it is about 80% of your success with finances are your behaviors, your ways of thinking, 20% of the numbers. I probably spend less than 20% of the time on the numbers. It's like, okay, cool. What are you going to do with it? What do you want to give? What do you want your impact to be? What do you want your legacy to be? These are the big questions we need to tackle as child-free folks.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Today, we're going to talk about something that we haven't really tabled on the podcast yet, and that is money and finances. And no, we're not going to be talking too much about how expensive it is to have children. We're actually going to be talking about child-free wealth, and specifically the things you need to keep in mind if you are considering staying child-free. I have none other than Dr. Jay Zigmont joining me today on the podcast. And not only is Jay child-free himself, but he is founder and CEO of Childfree Wealth, a life and financial planning firm dedicated to helping child-free and permanently childless people. Childfree Wealth is the first life and financial planning firm dedicated to serving child-free people. Dr. Jay is a certified financial planner, child-free wealth specialist, and author of the book Portraits of Child-Free Wealth, as well as the upcoming book, The Child-Free Guide to Life and Money. Dr. Jay is the co-host of the Child-Free Wealth podcast and has been featured in Fortune, Forbes, MarketWatch, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Business Insider, CNBC, and many other publications. In 2023, Dr. Jay was named a rising star by Financial Planning, and today he is joining me on the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. Awesome. Well, Dr. Jay Zigmont, thank you so much for joining us today as one of our very first men to come on to the Kids Are Child-Free podcast. And I'm not sure how often you've been told this, but like the women have been asking for you. They have been waiting for you, and they want to hear what you have to say today, both as far as your decision to be child-free, as well as the expertise that you're going to share as a child-free wealth expert. But before we get into all that, I would love for you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and your story. And I have to say, I'm someone who's had what I consider to be a relatively colorful, varied career path thus far. But learning a little bit about yourself, you have done some really interesting things. And so I'm curious, like, what sort of led you to today and a bit about what you do now.
That's fair. I'm used to being the only guy in the room in a lot of these communities. So it's like, it's interesting. A lot of the child-free, childless communities are mostly run by women. And they have questions like, where are the guys? Mm-hmm. And we've actually looked at our Instagram and other, and it's like 80% women. It is. Last 2 weeks ago, I was at the Childless Summit, and I was the only guy speaking there. And there was like 4 of us in the room. And it's just, I don't know where the guys are. So maybe that should be one of your like questions to figure out kind of where all they are as a community and come together. But anyway, my story, I'm doing finance now, but I'm not a finance guy by nature. I come out of healthcare and academia. I'm one of those weird career changers to finance. And my background, my PhD is in adult learning. So my background is really in coaching folks. So executive coaching and financial coaching, other things. And what you realize real quickly is people are more willing to pay for financial coaching than life coaching, even though they might need the life side more, but that's a separate thing. And if you get into the financial world, at least in the US, there's a lot of regulatory issues. So you have to become a certified financial planner. And I started that. And the interesting thing to me was there was never once a mention of being child-free in any of the literature, any of the training. It doesn't exist. My wife and I are child-free. So we, when we were dating, she told me, hey, there's a 50-50 chance if I would die if I get pregnant. I was like, all right, that took care of that choice. It's like, people ask me, is it by choice or not? And I'm like, I don't have a clue. It's 15 years ago. Like, it was just like, yep, that checked the box. So I started looking at it saying, my real question was like, how weird are my wife and I in that, we're child free and it doesn't exist in the financial world. And the truth is we are weird. We're 2 PhDs. We sit around at night talking about research studies. So like we are a little special on our own, but the question was, how weird are we? And come to find out, something like 25% of the US is child free. I had no clue. And if you look in the literature, you look in, financial books, there's, I've got a new financial book coming out at the end of the year, but besides that, there's nothing out there talking about being child free. And I'm like, what? Why? Is there a reason for that? And it's interesting. Since I've run my company now, when we're coming on our third year, serving the child-free population has been phenomenal. It's great to serve people just like me, but there's also a lot of judgments and a lot of other issues that come with it. So some days I go, oh, I understand why nobody serves the population, because, I have people, I have more people praying for my soul than I know what to do with. I mean, it's just kind of the reality check, but it is my passion. I hit what we call the child-free midlife crisis and hit all my goals. And I was like, what do I do next? My answer was go help other people hit their goals. So that's what I do.
Very cool. So many questions off the back of what you've just shared. Now, first of all, so it sounds like for you, I just want to kind of tackle your own child-free decision or path or inevitability, if you will, based on obviously very scary for your wife to be in like a very precipitous sort of situation there, to know that if she was to become pregnant, that would be life or death, quite literally. So first of all, let's go back to the beginning. When you were a young man, a boy, if you will, like, did you think at all about fatherhood? Is that something that you envisioned for yourself?
I would probably be considered a fence sitter. Doesn't really matter either way. But frankly, I was young enough that it didn't matter either. I had somebody recently, I was doing a press thing, and they said, if you go back 15 years ago, would you change your mind? I'm like, 15 years ago, like, that was a completely different person. I mean, let's be honest with that. We often get stuck by the decisions the 18-year-old version of us made. Like, for example, the 18-year-old version of us decided which college to go to, which career to go into, all that. I'm 46. The 18-year-old version of me was really dumb. Okay, let's just be honest with that. So whatever his choices was at that time, it is what it is. That's I don't trust any of his decisions at this point. I think the hard part for us, it's kind of interesting. We decided, hey, never going to have kids. Just made sense. We went to get married, and my wife was actually raised Catholic. And we went to the priest, and they got to do the pre-K, and he's like, hey, you have to agree to raise your kids Catholic. We said, fine, we're not having any. And he goes, oh, no, you have to agree to have kids and raise them Catholic.
Wow.
We actually couldn't get married in the Catholic Church. We had to actually change our whole thing. We end up at a small church, and my family and all that. But the hard part is you don't realize there's such judgment.
Yeah.
Because we're just like, hey, I don't want my wife to die. That was the decision-making process.
Yeah.
But it started changing so much around you. And we've traveled all across the US. And what I found is, we're right now in the deep South in a post-row world. Not having kids is a big issue down here. When we're in the Northeast, not a big issue. We're in the Midwest, huge issue. Like, there's all these different reactions. And somebody asked me the other day, what's the worst thing about being child-free? And it's really the judgment from other folks. Everything else is awesome. It's just like, it's other people's opinions, which they don't get a vote. Not my problem.
Yeah. I would say that's the case based on what both I've experienced, but more specifically talking to other people, what they've found as well. And I consider myself relatively lucky based on probably having lived in like big urban centers, that it's kind of been like, yeah, okay, you don't have kids. There's of course sort of sometimes sideways snide comments, but I just kind of let those pass by. But the response I get from people around this whole child-free choice, specifically people who do have kids, it's either like, what's the big thing? Like, good for you. Of course, if you don't want kids, you shouldn't have them. But others are from environments and, cultures, upbringings, religions, where it really is such a big thing. And I think maybe that's partly what makes it hard. It's this uncertainty of like, what are you going to get? How are people going to respond? And as soon as you have a negative reaction or a bad sort of circumstance like that, I think it puts people's guard up a bit to expect more of the same thing. Okay, super interesting. So I'm curious, like, is your wife still Catholic? Is that that must have been an interesting shift to feel very unaccepted in your choice, in your path.
Yeah, and that's her story to share, not mine.
Of course.
I think there's a balancing act. You have to figure out where your place is in this world and where you're accepted and where you're not.
Yeah.
I often talk to my clients and I'll say, whose voice is in your head saying you have to do X?
I love
when you
that
pull
question.
it apart, it's not really you. Like, it's religion, it's culture, it's family, it's others. I'm 46 now. My wife's a little younger. we're kind of at the old enough age that people stop asking ish. There's still family members like collecting clothes, hoping we one day have kids.
Wow.
I'm like, wait a minute, and you have to be sound enough in your own beliefs.
Yeah.
And then you have to tune out some of those other voices in your head.
Yeah.
But they're still there and they still come back. And that's the hard part is there are times where you don't realize what you're doing. So great example is a lot of folks I work with will be like, oh, I got to buy a house. I'm like, why? If you're going to move every 2-3 years, it makes no sense. Rent. Well, because you're supposed to buy a house. Well, you're supposed to have kids too. It's like that part of that voice in your head saying, we call it the American dream, the 2.5 kids, the house, the white picket fence, the dog, if you choose not to follow that path, that's okay.
Yeah. But
that's all the voices. And being deep in the South, you get 2 questions. Where's your church home? And how many kids do you have? It's not, do you have kids? How many? So it's part of that culture.
So interesting. And interesting for me to hear as someone from the West Coast of Canada. I mean, you obviously see media portrayals of what it's like in the southern US, but to hear that that's really it's not if, it's how many. Okay. I love that question that you asked. And for everyone listening, I think that's such an important one for you to ask yourself, not just around this kids or child-free decision and any perceived or maybe even subconscious or unconscious pressures you feel, but around every decision you're making, whose voice is telling you to do that. I know you shared that in your book, which am I allowed to say that I have an advanced copy and that people should buy it?
You're allowed to say it. It's up for pre-sale. We can, but you can't share your copy.
I won't share my copy. Why would I do that? No. I highlighted that question because I thought, okay, that's really good. Okay. Already dropping wisdom. Now, I want to get into the child-free wealth work you do in just 1 minute, but what I'm curious to know is, so you're still, in some sense, you and your wife receiving or fielding commentary, the hope that you may still someday have children at the ripe old age of 46. Of course, still a possibility, maybe for some folks, not for you. Of course, you've picked your path. What would you say, if any, difference has been in the experience between your wife and yourself in terms of how you've been treated by society and culture, broadly speaking?
Yeah, let's be real. Women get it much harder than men. They just do.
Yeah.
It's interesting. If a guy asks me, hey, do you have kids? And I say no, they go, well, good for you. You do get
my husband
you
says
get a pat in the back.
Yeah, totally. Awesome. Cool, man. Good life.
They're like, I've even had guys go, yep, if I had to do over, I'm, my favorite honest point was somebody says, I love my kids. I hate being a parent. And I was like, yeah. With women, it is a judgment. And it's interesting. I've actually I had somebody that was working for me stop me. I was in healthcare. Stop me and say, hey, I've been thinking about you and your wife. You're really smart. You need to have kids. And I'm like, who the hell do you think you are to be, coming to your boss and saying you need to have kids? But that's common. And my wife has kind of had that balancing act of how do you have that discussion? And I'm more of listen, it'll kill my wife and it kills the discussion. Usually people stop. Yeah. But that's not exactly so easy for her to say.
Yeah.
And people go, I get people ask me all the time, well, why? I'm like, you sure you want to ask that question? Because I'll give you the answer.
Wow.
And you're not going to like it. And I think what I've found is as I've gotten further and further into this, the identity piece around it. And I think after Roe was overturned in the US, it's gotten a lot worse. Mm-hmm. For my company, name of the company is Childfree Wealth. It's pretty obvious who we serve. And I went to buy software for the company and they said, well, who do you serve? I said, oh, I serve child-free folks. They go, oh, you hate kids. And I'm like, no, why would you make that assumption? And these things exist. And you have to defend yourself. I had somebody I was working with who said, very religious background. She said her family keeps driving her crazy about this child-free choice. And she said, I really kind of wish that I had a physical reason I couldn't have kids.
Yeah.
Because then that would stop them. Without that, they won't. And I was like, wow, is that a hard statement to say? But it's truthful.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because I was just thinking now when you were talking about, you said understandably a little more difficult, I'm sure, perhaps emotional or painful for your wife to disclose that. But, even for yourself, I thought, well, that hopefully sounds and feels like a good reason, but the reason I just don't want them, it doesn't seem adequate enough for other people. And I mean, I had this conversation with a friend of my husband's and mine as well recently, who's a funny sidebar, happy father, did not want to have kids at all, says best thing ever. I'm so glad we did it. And I thought, wow, what a gamble. And one that, let's face it, is much easier for a man to make than a woman to say, in a heterosexual partnership, to say, I don't really want it. Hey, let's see how it goes. Love it. Best thing ever. Should do it. And he said to me, why don't you guys want kids? And I said, I could give you a ton of different reasons, but no matter what I say, you're going to be able to counter it with something. I'm worried about the environment. Well, you fly a plane. Well, I, have anxiety. Well, other people with anxiety have kids. And I said, probably the most simple thing is just to say, I just don't want it. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting, these justifications we feel like we have to make, and that there needs to be a good enough reason should we choose not to have kids.
So I think what I've learned is child-free folks put a lot more thought into not having kids than people with kids often put into having them. And when you pull this part, like, okay, you can list a reason. We actually did a study on it, and most people had more than one reason, variety of things, everything from just don't want to the environment, all the other stuff you just listed. And you ask people, well, why'd you have kids? Well, because that's what you're supposed to do. Or, well, it just happened. And I'm like, okay, so you didn't put much thought in that. We've put a lot of thought into this and decided not to. And I think it's also a generational shift. You're seeing a lot of Gen Y, Gen Z going, do I want to follow the standard script? Mm-hmm. They're just pausing for a second. And they can choose to have kids. And the best I've ever heard is if you're going to have kids, it's got to be 2 enthusiastic yeses. Mm-hmm. And I like that, kind of 2 enthusiastic yeses. And now when you say, all right, well, if one person's like, I don't know, like I had somebody for my first book I interviewed and married his wife, and his wife said, hey, didn't want to have kids. Cool. They get further into the marriage. Wife changes their mind. What do you do when, we're going to be child free for life. And he said, well, I decided, all right, let's go with it. Because he said he'd rather him be miserable than her not ever have kids.
Wow.
Now, for fertility reasons, it didn't work out. But I was like, whoa. Like there's just a moment like, I understand, but I also I don't know. I want to be that kid from the parent who's miserable because they had it. Like, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
And my bottom line is I don't get a vote in their life. They don't get a vote in mine. We should all be okay with that. But these are all the things that come up. And, Thanksgiving is the tough time with a family having those discussions.
Yeah. 100%. And you know what? I like this, like normalizing the questioning of this, saying, I think child-free people oftentimes question this more. And I think there's this sort of myth or line of thinking that if you're questioning this naturally means you should not have children. And I have people all the time in my comments saying, hey, fence sitters, if you're thinking about this, it's a no. And I agree there should be, at least, I think a big part of you should have that enthusiasm. I think having certain reluctance to a degree makes sense because you're a smart person who recognizes that there are going to be challenges. But this idea that the only way you are a good parent is if you blindly never, question this decision, I don't think that's good either, because I think you wake up one day and think, wow, this is actually really complex and hard and nuanced. So I'm here for the questioning. I know. And by the way, you saying like you're kind of a coach first and foremost, that comes through in reading the book and just speaking with you. You have that financial experience and expertise and accreditation to back it up, but I can tell that you're really about understanding your clients in deeper ways and looking at their motivations. So on that topic, I want to hear a little bit more about your business, Childfree Wealth, and what you do there. And I mean, you talked about recognizing there was like this gap in the market, so to speak, which from a business perspective, like what a dream niche to be serving. I hope you are super busy. And it looks like I was looking at your website, you've got like quite a large growing team. But I want to hear a little bit more about like why financial planning and how did this kind of all come to fruition?
Yeah. So when I was going for my PhD, one of the things they teach you is when you're doing like a lit review, they find a hole in literature, like there's just something not covered. Sometimes there's a reason there's a hole. Like, it's not worth just always filling the hole.
Yeah.
And that was my big debate about serving the child-free community. So I actually I found the child-free Reddit had like 1.5 million people in there. And by the way, Reddit's its own cesspool, but that's a separate discussion. And you're looking at this going, all right, so let's say there's 1.5 million, because I didn't know the hit numbers at the time. Like there's 1.5 million and there's nobody serving child-free people. Is there a reason? And I put an ad on Reddit and I said, share with me what your child-free life is like. And this is for my first book. I did some research. I did interviews, all that. The first thing that I got some people signing up for it. That was great. But the ad got flagged as hate speech. Hate directed at me, hate directed. I'm like, oh, that's where we're going, huh? Like,
I don't get it.
Well, come to find out when I went into the data, about half the folks that are in that child-free subreddit are actually also in the parents subreddit. So, all right, we'll let that go for a second. But I was like, all right, if I'm going into this area and I'm going to get the hate and the thing, is it worth it? Because that's a business question. Like,
and a personal well-being question. Like, do you want to have a business where you're getting bombarded by hate all the time?
Actually, one of the first people I hired was somebody to handle social media because I just can't do social media. Like, I just can't deal with the comments.
Yeah.
But I also looked at it and said, okay, now I know about 25% of the U.S. is child-free. And we serve people with about $1 million or more. Mm-hmm. So there's about 4 million child-free millionaires in the United States. There's one financial planning firm serving all of them. Like, there's others that do it, but like the data said they were getting bad service. Like, so I asked them, like, what's it like to work with a financial planner? They said, well, they tell me, well, you're going to change your mind, or we're just going to plan like you have kids, or it's not any different. And I'm like, that's a problem. Yeah. That is like a disregard for you. And I started working on this, and I call we do life and financial planning because I don't think you can pull the life part out from the financial planning part. Mm-hmm. And I started looking at it. We do introductory meetings with clients. We actually do these called child-free checkups. We do like a deep dive and look at their finances in comparison. And I found about a third of our introductory meetings were ending up in tears. And I was like, what the heck is this? Mm-hmm. Come to find out, I started asking folks, and that what they told me is the first time they ever felt heard and seen. And I'm like, how? How can that be? Like, part of me is like, are you kidding me? Like next week I'm going to a financial planning conference to talk to financial planners about child-free folks. I'm like, listen, there's 25% of your customers you're mistreating.
Yeah.
And you're not, besides not giving good financial planning and all that, but like you're just not respecting them. The number I'm using is actually out of state of Michigan. That same study found about 8% were LGBTQ+. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about communities 3 times the size. And by the way, a lot of overlap between them. 50% of LGBTQ+ are child-free in this study. But there's this huge, huge population completely underserved. And I kind of jokingly say, look, I'm a straight white male, but I'm part of an underrepresented minority group.
Yeah.
And that is the truth.
Yeah.
And you realize that. And now I get up every morning, I go, okay, so there's 4 million child-free millionaires in the United States. If my company does phenomenally, like breaks every goal, we'll serve 1% of those folks. So we'll serve about 40,000. Now, in the financial planning world, that would make us like one of the largest firms in the United States. It'd make us huge. But it's only 1%. Like, It's nothing. And that's the hard part. So I'm spending my time talking to child-free folks about their finances. The other half of my time I spend talking to financial people, child-free people, and trying to get this conversation started.
Yeah.
And it's not easy. I was at a financial planning conference, and guy gets up in front of the group. He's part of a big organization that the whole group knows. And he goes, well, working with people without kids is the worst. And I'm like, did you really just say that? Like, what if he had stood up there and said, like, working with women is the worst, or pick any other group?
Yeah.
So I went to the head of the planning for it. And I'm like, hey, this guy just said this is inappropriate. You have this whole thing about inclusion. And they're like, well, he meant to word it differently. It's really not an issue. I'm like, are you kidding me? And that's the hard part. Like, some days I feel like I'm like yelling into the wind.
Yeah.
And other days I'm like, but I know I'm taking care of the right people.
Yeah. I'm curious, in that case, did he give reasoning for that?
What he really meant to say was estate planning for child-free folks is a challenge.
Yeah.
That is 100% true.
Yeah.
That is not what he said.
Yeah. Well, just because your job's hard doesn't make us at fault. It just means you need to think a little more creatively, right?
Well, I had another one. And so they're talking about investing in women and how women invest. And they said, well, divorce is easier if you don't have kids. I'm like, hold up. Like, that's a lot of assumptions you just made there.
Yeah. I've heard that one before, by the way.
Yeah. The truth is it's different. It is not easier or harder. It's different. And I do a lot of press and podcasts, and like, I'll catch people on these words. I'm like, they're like, well, you don't have a family. No, I do. It's just not, well, this is easier for you. No, it's not. Like, and these are the things we just got to pull apart.
Yeah.
And there are days where, so you and I, we come from the same child-free area. We're talking from the same audience somewhat. But I go to these other ones where they've never even heard of the term child-free.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we need to be having these conversations. And when I was doing a financial podcast, they were going through it, and I said, well, in finance, there's not much innovation. And it's true. There's iteration, like little improvements. And he goes, but this child-free stuff is the first time I've ever heard of it. And he'd been doing it for decades. And I'm like, why? Like, really? You know child-free people, you just don't know how to help them, how to work with them. And that's a big issue.
So we know that for many of us who are on the fence about this decision, that we can grapple with this for a very long time. I personally was going back and forth for several years. It was probably getting close to a decade by the time I really committed myself to making a decision. And when we reach that point, that decision-making point where we realize this isn't just an answer that's magically going to appear, but that it's something we need to actually concretely, consciously decide, it's sort of this moment where it's like, enough is enough already. I'm tired of going in circles. I'm tired of the pros and cons lists or hoping the answer will just show up. I'm tired of reading the books or talking about this ad nauseum in therapy. And if you are at that point, if you are ready to finally make a decision about whether to have kids or stay child-free, I want to invite you to join me for the summer session of my Kids or Child-Free group coaching program. This is a 3-month-long program. We're going to be kicking off this round in the middle of July, and it's for those of you who are on the fence, you're trying to make a decision. Nothing that you've been doing has elicited a clear choice, and so you're ready to do something different. And if you want to join me as your guide to guide you through this process to help you get clear on the right path for you among a group of like-minded women who are also grappling with the same decision, I want you to check out my Kids or Child-Free group coaching program. Again, we kick things off in July. I'm going to link to the details in the show notes of today's episode, but you can also find that under the Work With Me tab at kidsorchildfree.com. I look forward to having some of you join us for this session of Kids or Child Free. Well, we're glad to have at least one or a few people advocating for the child-free and considering our unique financial needs and life needs, which is something I want to talk about. And first of all, I'm interested to know, I mean, you talk about your clients being people with net worth of at least $1 million. We hear and see all the time about these child-free dinks living their amazing lives, Mai Tais on the beach, going on vacation, every other week. Are child-free people wealthy and rich, would you say? Is this what people can, because we primarily, people listening, are on the fence. So should they be choosing the child-free lifestyle because they're going to be, ridiculously wealthy, or is that just a misconception?
Yeah, so the way I say it is living a life of child-free wealth means you have time, money, and freedom to do what you enjoy. That does not mean you're rich, okay? So we intentionally serve people with about $1 million or more because it just costs us money to run it.
That's
as a
your
business,
industry,
you have to, it just. And by the way, there's 4 million out there, so that's part of it. But there's this misnomer that you become child free and checks rain down from the sky to you. Well, you don't have to take care of kids, so you got all this money. And I had somebody for my first book, and I was interviewing her, and her big goal for the year was she had moved from a air mattress to a real bed. That was a miracle for her.
Yeah,
that's the truth. There are people, child-free folks, that are barely keeping their head above water.
Yeah.
But if they had a kid, they would drown.
Yeah.
Income disparities, housing disparities, all this, 100% true. The difference is for child-free folks, we have a lot more flexibility. One of our top downloaded podcasts is actually, I'll Make You Quit Your Job, because I talk a lot about if you're unhappy, move, change.
Yeah.
People are like, well, but I can't. I'm like, if you're child-free, literally, yeah. My wife got a different job offer. We packed up. We had 2 Masters at the time. Packed up 2 Masters in the Prius and moved 1,200 miles. No big deal. Mm-hmm. Now I got to say, you got to see 2 Masters in the back of a Prius. That's kind of entertaining.
Yeah. Do you have a photo of that you can send?
Oh, we probably do somewhere. But you got to see the people on the street seeing the dog face and what the heck is in that? But we could do that. It's not a big deal. Now, that's the challenge is if you've been following the standard life script that says you must do this, you must do that, you must do this, then I pause people and say, okay, change. Now, here's the thing. If you're fence sitting, still unsure, follow the standard life script, the standard financial plan. When you've gone off to the child-free side, I'm looking at it now as kind of almost like a choose your own adventure book. Now, I remember these when I was growing up as a kid, like, you know, if you want them to die, you go to this, you want them to live. That's what we're doing is we have a choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we have all the tools to do it. Like that's a separate question, but we get to choose a different adventure. And once that happens, there's actually a bit of a freeing moment, but it's actually overwhelming too.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, if I can do anything, what can I, I had somebody the other day, we went through all the money. They really wanted to financial independence, retire early, quit their job early. We're like, did all their numbers are like 40 something. I'm like, cool. So let's do it. You're good. They're like, oh, that wasn't what I meant. They're like, I thought that was like 5 or 10 years from now. I'm like, no, you're good now. Wait, what? And that brain just explodes.
Yeah.
So if you're struggling, well, what do you have to change to do it? If that means you got to go back to school, you got to move, you got to go to this, I had somebody struggling. They were living in LA. Their 1-bedroom apartment was $5,000 a month. I'm like, you can't make it. You just got to move out of LA, but you can move out.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're rich, but you have the other options.
Yeah. I like that. It's like, you may not be able to do all the things, but you can do different things and you can get creative and you can find ways of making things work. Okay. So something I've noticed, and by the way, this whole thing with like too many options and overwhelm, I hear that already from people who haven't even chosen that child-free path, but are considering it, where they say to me, in literal terms, if I don't have kids, what the heck am I going to do? They either have too many possibilities or they have what I call a total lack of imagination about how life might be able to look. I think because we do follow these scripts and we aren't shown different ways of living and being. And I think it can be really exciting to consider different possibilities, but I can also see how it feels stifling because it's like, I can do all the things. And so is that something that in your work, you kind of like help people narrow down in terms of where they may want to focus their energy, their money, their time?
Yeah, we frequently get people at what we call a child-free midlife crisis.
Okay.
So this is when you hit your personal, professional, and financial goals, and then you're like, now what? And it's not necessarily 40. It might be 30. It might be 60 for some. But it's like, all right, I checked all the boxes. I did all the good boy, good girl things that I'm supposed to do. What's the next 40 years of my life look like? And we'll often ask people, I don't care what age you are, I say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'm like, I don't know. Because they've been following the path the 18-year-old version of them set.
Yeah.
For me, I hit that at about 40. I was actually, I was running a maple syrup farm, doing like firewood, selling stuff online, just fun stuff. And people go, well, you got a PhD in doing maple syrup. Yeah, it's fun to run a tractor and be out in the woods with a chainsaw and do fun stuff. But I was on my tractor and somebody from high school, one of the people I grew up with, died of cancer. It was the first one of my close friends that had died of cancer, and it really hit me. And I was like, what am I doing with the rest of my life? And now if you have kids, often what happens is your goals, you kind of push onto your next generation. Oh, Johnny has to go to college. Johnny has to whatever. And I got to save money for it. But you have that moment. And I realized I didn't really want another set of goals for myself, but I could help other people get to their goals. Well, when clients reach out to us, we try to say, okay, let's plan for your life first, then your finances.
Yeah.
And they'll go, well, when can I retire? I'm like, well, do you want to retire? No. Well, then why are you asking me when can you retire? Like their brain just is stuck in this standard life script that says you got to do all these things. So for example, most child-free folks want to do what's called die with zero. They don't really care about how much money they pass on to the next generation. So if you're going to die with zero, you can actually retire earlier or cut back work earlier or follow your passion. We got about a third of our clients starting businesses. We got some just doing volunteering. I don't know what. And that's where they start having this discussion about like, well, but what are my options? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's figure it out. And I'll ask them, well, what'd you always wish you could do? Like I wanted to go to space camp is what I wanted to do as a kid, but astronaut just didn't work out for me. But like, what is it? And you start pulling this apart. And so many people go, well, nobody's ever asked me that question.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, I got in this job, then I got offered this next job, and then I got a promotion, and then this, and you got like stuck on this path. I'm like, okay, what do you want to do? Like, well, what I really want to do is, I say, okay, let's figure that out. And then the hard part is it's almost like, the dog that caught the car. Like, what do you do when you actually can follow your dreams? It's like, what happens if you're not struggling? We work with a lot of clients on guilt around money. Like, is it okay for me to be okay with money, but my sister to struggle, or my friend, or whatever? It's all of these things. The way we say it is about 80% of your success with finances are your behaviors, your ways of thinking, 20% of the numbers. I probably spend less than 20% of the time on the numbers. It's like, okay, cool. What are you going to do with it? What do you want to give? What do you want your impact to be? What do you want your legacy to be? These are the big questions we need to tackle as child-free folks.
Yeah, totally agree. And so one thing I'm curious to know, my husband and I would say we very much prioritize living in the now, as far as like we take the trips, we have the experiences, we're very much experiences over things. Yeah, we don't want the house, we don't want the stuff. We're very clear on all of that. And the first part of my question is that something you see more so with child-free people? Like this idea of like, I wouldn't say it's that we won't delay gratification, but it's more the idea of why should we postpone our joy in the things that are important to us, which I see as a plus. However, from a financial standpoint, I guess my question is like, how do we balance that with making sure that we're also being smart for the future and not finding ourselves in a position where 30 years down the road, where if we do want to work less or not at all, that we're able to do that?
Yeah, so we call it FILE, financial independence, live early. And if retirement's kind of on-off switch for work, FILE's more of a dial switch, kind of like, how do I find this balance? And what I'll argue with clients is, can we get a better return by investing in you than investing in the stock market? You just outlined experiences in your life that are probably a better return on investment than the investment in the stock market. And it becomes this balancing act. Now, we have a program called 8 No Baby Steps, and the first 3 are getting out of debt. So we're going to get you out of debt first. Like, you got to have no debt before we start going like, to travel the world.
Does that include a mortgage?
Well, mortgage and buying a house is a choice, not a requirement for child-free folks.
Okay, let's say I have an investment property in Canada, which I do.
Okay, so watch this with the investment property in Canada. I almost said California. That's a different world. But we are focused on how do we make your finances simple so your life can be amazing. So does having the investment property in Canada make your finances more simple?
Yes.
How?
Well, because it's in a hot market where it's already grown like 50% in the last few years, and it's just there, and we've got
But you
renters.
pay a management company you may pay a management company, and I have to do the rent, and we got the taxes, and we got the Here's the thing: you could sell that property, invest that in the stock market, and probably get the same return and have less work.
Yeah, potentially. That's what my investment guy would say too.
Okay,
he's like, why are you buying a property?
So a lot of people talk about owning rental properties. Owning rental property has work, so it doesn't actually make your life more simple.
Yeah,
you've got a system around it, and it's working. But then I asked the second question is, does it make your life more amazing? That property does not make your life more amazing.
We don't live there. We don't enjoy it. It's just an apartment we own.
Okay.
Yeah.
So people want exposure to real estate. You can actually buy what's called a REIT, a real estate investment trust. It's like a stock just in real estate.
Interesting.
Get the same rental income if you want and not have to do any of the work. So what we try to focus on is simplifying your finances so you can live an amazing life. So if your goal is to travel the world and have these great experiences and do all that, let's make your finances so simple that you think about them twice a year. Like, yep, money's still there, and do that. And what often happens is we can do the math on what happens if you never save another dollar. And for a lot of folks, you get to kind of $1 million. If you never save another dollar, $1 million is going to double every 7 to 10 years. It doubles again every 7 to 10 years.
Okay.
It's on average in the market.
Okay, this is good to know.
All right. So it gets to a point where if you want to die with zero, so let me ask you the question. Do you care about how much money you pass on to the next generation?
No, not particularly. I mean, the idea of having abundant wealth that I could donate to some wonderful cause is nice, but it's not like I'm going to set aside all of my own joy and pleasure in life and generosity to others while I'm alive in order to do that. So,
yeah, the way I say it is my nephews get what's left over. If they get 10,000, 100,000, that's fine.
Yeah. If
they get $1 million, I made a mistake because I should have helped them earlier in their life. Because when I die at 90 and they're 60, it's not helpful to them.
Yeah.
So if you're going to die with zero, at some point you actually have to bring your net worth down. So if you've got this $1 million, I'm just going to use that as a fun number.
Yep.
It's growing over here and it's growing. At some point, you're going to have to start spending that money from that investments. Well, most people, when they get to that point, they've gotten really good at saving money. We actually spend more time with our clients talking about spending money than saving money. We get people that have they have what we call the blueberry problem, where they're buying the frozen blueberries because they're $1 cheaper than the fresh blueberries. And I'm like, you got a couple $1 million, you can afford some blueberries. Like, you're fine.
Yeah.
But it's just the mental things we do. Where what we'll do, somebody like you, we're talking about travel, okay? Maybe we set a budget and your travel budget's $100,000 a year or $50,000 or $20,000, whatever it is, and we do an equal amount of giving. Because if giving to the world is a big, let's do those both. Let's make that a priority rather than, hey, let's just save it or invest it for all of it.
One thing that we hear a lot about with having kids is kids are obviously expensive. We hear numbers, I don't know, $300,000 a year, I think I've seen for the States or Canada, which to me seems probably quite on the low side. I saw a much lower number recently for the UK, but in any case, we can all agree that it costs more to have kids than to not have kids. That being said, are there like financial costs or pitfalls or disadvantages for somebody who chooses the child-free path?
The biggest issue is planning for long-term care. And I'll use the US Census numbers. They looked at adults over 55 and they found childless adults, 2.5% of them got any financial support from their family. So that's like nothing. Now, the interesting thing is in adults over 55 who are parents, 1.5% got any support from their family. So the truth is nobody's getting financial support from their family when they're old.
Yeah.
Child-free folks, we just know we have to do it. Yeah. We have to have a plan for long-term care. My goal with my clients is by about mid-40s that we have a plan for long-term care for you. So that might be insurance, that might be cash set aside, all that. The hard question, at least in the US, is who's going to make the decisions for you. So who's your power of attorney? Who's your executor? All of that. And in the US, there's actually an issue that most trust companies, other things, won't do any of the medical stuff. So it becomes an issue of like, how do we do that? My company's working on a solution, hopefully be out by the end of the year to do that for people. But it's this question of like, if you don't have a next of kin, who makes sure like I'm in the right home that I'm in, or who, make sure my care is right, or other things. It's those type of things that become a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a big concern that people have, again, specifically when they're on the fence. I think when we commit to being child-free, it's not that we don't worry about those things, but we take a little bit more of a like proactive, pragmatic approach where we're like, okay, well, let's sort it out. But that becomes a part, like a reluctant feeling for people of like, oh God, who's going to take care of me? Who's going to figure these things out? Now, first of all, what I'm hearing for you is there's like marginal difference between parents and non-parents as far as actually having that support, at least financially speaking, which I love hearing that in like a really concrete term, because anecdotally, I think a lot of us hear that like, oh, there's elderly parents in nursing homes and nobody comes to visit them. But to actually hear like, no, they're not getting more support or marginally more is good, I guess, or not good, depending how you look at it. For some of those more practical concerns, and I think a lot of it is more this like existential question or realization, like I'm going to die and who's going to be there. What I'm hearing from you, it sounds like there's not just one channel or avenue, but like what would a person do to start thinking about these things? Should they talk to their financial planner? Should they talk like, and bearing in mind, we've got people all over the world, but like, how would you start putting a plan in place?
Yeah, what you're looking for is actually called an estate plan.
Okay.
So in the US, that's the will, power of attorney, medical power of attorney, financial power of attorney. In the US, if you don't have next of kin, the government or the healthcare systems make decisions for you, which I don't trust.
I don't want that. Yeah.
Yeah, like just
please no.
I don't care your political beliefs. Like I don't trust any of them.
Yeah.
And also in the US, if you don't have a will, and you don't have a next of kin, your estate may go to the government. Like they don't search hard for you. So I have clients, I don't care what age I get you. I get somebody in their 20s. I'm like, okay, we're going to get the paperwork in place. We're going to get your will, power of attorney. We can change it every couple of years. Not a big deal. The other thing is, can you find a either person or company to help you with it? In some countries, you can. In other areas, the only answer is like a conservatorship, which sucks. Okay, I'm just being honest with that. You don't want the government to take over your life.
No.
So you need to find somebody. And what I've seen some folks doing is kind of like the Golden Girls setup. So we have like 4 friends. We all watch out for each other. We got each other's names on the paperwork. Works great, except for the last person. Yeah. The last person to live is screwed. Like
totally. You're watching everyone drop around me. Oh, you were like, oh no.
Right. So we're actually, it's actually the problem that has kept me up for about 2 years. I've been searching for solutions. In the US, I found in California or Arizona, you can actually pay somebody to do it. In Georgia, there's one attorney who does it, but the rest of the states, you're out of luck. And I've been working with a trust company. We're trying to create a product with this. And I went to the gentleman there, and he's been doing trust work for 35 years. And he happens to be child free. So I said to him, I said, hey, what do you have for a solution for this?
Yeah.
For people to make decisions for us. And his answer was, I've been doing this for 35 years. Nobody's ever asked me that question, and I have no clue how to do it.
Wow.
And I'm like, all right, we have a problem. And I've gone out to big companies, insurance companies, others, and I'm like, why? We need products for this stuff. Yeah. And they all look at it and go, how come nobody's ever done this? And I'm like, I don't know. and I have one of my colleagues is actually starting a child-free financial planning firm in the UK. I've had a few other people reach out, but I have people from all across the country, the world, from different countries asking me, how do I do this? I'm like, I have no clue how you do it in Canada, for example.
Yeah.
Canada actually has a better support system than the US, but what are the legalese? Do I have to go to a lawyer? You have to build a team to support you.
Yeah.
That might be the financial planner, estate planner, tax person, is a lawyer. The truth is the parents should be doing the same thing. It's just, we know it. I had somebody, I was explaining this concept that we're going to be people's power of attorney and all that. And he said it this way. He says, I was on a podcast, and he said he's got 2 kids, and he wakes up every morning thinking that he killed his mother. I'm like, whoa, what do you mean?
You like, talk to someone about that or not.
Well, and what it was his mom had a medical power of attorney. He pulled the plug on his mom. He knew his mom's wishes, but he wakes up every morning thinking, I did this.
Wow.
And he's like, I wish I had somebody I could pay so my kids don't have to do it.
Yeah.
Like, I agree. We just as child-free folks know we have no other choice.
Yeah.
And I had somebody the other day ask me, all this stuff about file and life first and planning. He said, couldn't you just change this so parents could follow this holistic of view too? And I'm like, yes, but I'm not serving them. Let somebody else.
Someone also have to take the torch on that.
Well, but we have to, as child-free folks, we have to tackle those topics earlier.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
Same with planning for how to care for your parents, other things. We just have to have a plan for it.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're working towards some solutions, and there are solutions that we can piece together. What I'm hearing is you want to make that process easier and not having, holes in the plan, so to speak, like, oh, I'm the last one standing, therefore I don't now have someone to look after me. I want to point people in, and when we wrap up, of course, I want you to share a little bit more about where people can find you, but your blog, I know, has some really great articles on there. Some of it, or most of it's going to be oriented towards the US, but I think it's still a good starting point for people globally, even if you say, okay, what's our equivalency here in Germany, and some things to start thinking and asking about when it comes to these questions, not just the end of life care piece, but generally speaking, as a child-free person. Before we wrap things up today, you told us one of the most challenging things about being child-free, which was, you said, fielding the judgments of other people. I'm curious if you can tell me what you love best about being child-free.
I think for me, it's the freedom to do whatever the heck I want. And some Saturdays that's just sleeping in. Seriously, we take for granted that, my wife and I'll jump on social media and like, hey, there's this festival down the street. Like, let's go. We can do that without a huge amount of planning, and that freedom is worth everything to me. And it's not necessarily that it's about the money, because that's not. I mean, one day I hope to get on a boat and travel the world, and that takes a bunch of money. But just being like, we're going to go to that art festival this weekend. We can't. We don't have to get a babysitter or take the kids with us, or it's just so nice. Our dog's kind of cool if we leave him for a day. He's like, give me a bow and I'm good. That's a different way of life.
Yeah, I agree. I say the same thing about my dog. I'm allowed to leave my dog at home without having social services come and get me in trouble. Okay, Jay, before we wrap things up, I have 5 rapid fire questions for you. First and foremost, I want you to finish this sentence. Being child-free is?
The ability to have the time, freedom, and money to do what you enjoy.
Being child-free is not?
Is not easier.
One thing that you believe would make this decision, this kids or child-free decision, easier for women and other folks who are on the fence would be?
To talk to people who have made the choice.
What is one thing that you want parents to know?
That it's okay if your kids don't have kids.
So good. Amen. All right. And lastly, if you could give one piece of advice to someone who's currently on the fence about whether or not to have kids, what would that advice be?
Follow your heart.
So good. Thank you so much, Dr. Jay. Now, where can people find you if they want to work with you, if they want to buy the book that's coming out? You said end of this year. Tell us all the good stuff.
Yep. Childfreewealth.com, Childfree on all the socials except for Twitter, because Elon thinks childless folks should not have a vote.
True.
That is actually the truth.
That is true. Yeah.
just saying, Child Free Wealth podcast. And then the new book coming out is The Child Free Guide to Life and Money, out for pre-sale just about everywhere. You can pick up a copy. And the best thing you can do for any author is the pre-sale, buy the book and share it, because that helps us considerably.
Yes, I always tell people, buy the book before it's out. I can tell you, I got a sneak preview of the book. There's lots of good stuff in there that I'm going to be going through with Chris, my husband. So thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you coming on. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in for this episode of the Kids or Child Free podcast. Now, I have a few new goodies for you over on the free resources page, which you'll find at kidsorchildfree.com. I will also link to this in today's show notes. And the new resources that I've added are a podcast episode, a secret podcast episode, if you will. It's a recording that I made prior to launching the Kids or Child Free podcast. And it's actually a very personal share of mine related to a situation that happened with a friend of mine. And it really talks about how triggering this kids or child-free decision can be. It's vulnerable. There may or may not be a few tears shed, and it's available exclusively when you head to the free resources page and sign up for it at kidsorchildfree.com. The other resource I recently added is the replay of the event we had earlier in the spring, which was the Between Friends conversation I had with my friend Lauren Grant, who is a filmmaker. She is a mom. And we talked all about how we've maintained our friendship throughout all the ups and downs that motherhood and this decision that I've made has brought. We talk about how you personally can navigate some of the concerns and the challenges that you might be having in your friendships when one of you has kids and the other one doesn't. Again, check it out. That's at kidsorchildfree.com under the free resources tab. Thank you again for listening today, and we'll see you back here soon for another episode of the Kids or Child Free podcast.